Thanks for having me tonight. I'm excited to be here with you. I've actually never been to Bellarmine. I've been to Louisville a few times since starting Students for Life in Kentucky. I'll be at Western Kentucky tomorrow night, so that's exciting. And then we head to Arizona, my family and I. So I know when abortion advocates and kind of those who apologize for the abortion industry heard the title of my speech tonight, which in case you didn't know is The Future is Anti-Abortion, there are likely feelings of outrage or unbelief with the thought that I'm either a complete moron, blind to the current political realities happening in Washington, D.C., or I'm a religious extremist who believes that God will come down to earth tomorrow and single-handedly reverse more than 45 years of abortion law in our country. While I believe that God could do that, I'm pretty sure I'm neither of those things. But I do believe that our future is anti-abortion in our nation, and that actually will be a reality that we will see within our lifetime. And I know that thought or just thinking about a nation without legal abortion can bring fear. It can bring shame for abortion decisions in your past. So I just want to start off by clearing the air tonight. That is not my intention, nor is it the intention of those who fight every day in this human rights movement. In fact, if you have a friend who is facing a crisis pregnancy, is pregnant right now, who believes they may be pregnant, I would encourage you to have her go to optionline.org or text helpline to 313131 to get connected with free pregnancy resources right here in Louisville. And actually, you guys have some fantastic resources here in your community who will serve her and her preborn and born child after the delivery. If you have a friend or if you are hurting from a past abortion decision, I encourage you to go to abortionchangesyou.org or abortionrecovery.org to get connected to counselors, licensed counselors who can help you process your grief and pain and get you onto the path of healing. Now, the political extremism and the theatrics that we're currently watching every day in Washington, D.C., I actually think proves my point of my presentation tonight. After 4 years of an anti-abortion president and the policies handed down from the Trump administration, the abortion lobby is desperate. They are absolutely desperate to quickly reverse the trends by silencing those whom they disagree with and reverse all of the policies that have been passed, the laws that have been passed on the state level for more than 40 years that heavily restrict or ban certain abortion procedures. Even now, the argument, a law that was just dropped on Capitol Hill on Thursday night, is actually calling for the rescinding of the Hyde Amendment. The Hyde Amendment has been with us since 1976. It's an appropriations rider, which actually has to be attached to every single spending bill. It used to be something that both left and right, Democrat and Republican, would agree on, saying that regardless of how you feel about abortion, taxpayers shouldn't be forced to pay for abortion, federal taxpayers. Now, states can vote to fund abortions, but not federal taxpayer dollars, except in the cases of rape, incest, or life of the mother. There was a bill dropped Thursday night by Democratic leadership in Washington, D.C., calling for rescission of the Hyde Amendment. The COVID relief bill that was just passed is the first bill since 1976 that did not include the Hyde Amendment. This is political extremism. This is something that actually goes against more than 80% of Americans who would say, no, tax dollars shouldn't be funding abortions. In short, I believe the abortion lobby, are overplaying their hand. And they're moving as quickly as possible to do it while Joe Biden is in this honeymoon phase. You can do nothing wrong. But they're overplaying their hand. And they're trying to reverse all of the pro-life policies and the gains that have been made for women and children in the past 4 years. Their actions, I think, only support the thesis that the future of our country will be anti-abortion. And I believe it has to be, because science and technology have proven that what is inside of a mother is simply not a blob of meaningless tissue, but a unique, whole, living human being that's never existed before and will never exist again. It's simply science denial to ignore that human life begins when sperm and egg unite and a unique creation is formed. 5 decades ago, when Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton, the 2 decisions which together legalized abortion all 9 months for any reason, which overturned every state restriction on abortion, when that was handed down, there was a question that the jurists asked, and they actually said that they refused to answer the question of when life began, because they said they weren't scientists, they weren't doctors, they weren't philosophers, they weren't theologians. It's settled science now. The case for the humanity of the preborn has become airtight. Both science and technology show that this is irrefutable. You don't have to look any further than an ultrasound of a preborn child, especially a 3D, a 4D ultrasound of a preborn child, to know that what's inside of her obviously is living, because dead things don't suck their thumbs. Dead things don't blink. Dead things don't dream. We know what's inside of her is living. We know the law of biogenesis says like begets like. No matter how many times I have sex with my husband attempting to reproduce a koala bear, I cannot have a koala bear. I want a koala bear. I've looked into how do I adopt a koala bear. I can't do it. It's illegal. I can't make a koala bear because my husband and I are both humans. So we know what's inside of her has to be a human being. We know it's living, it's growing. Dead things don't grow. You can just consider at 21 days after conception, the heart begins to beat. At 6 weeks, the 6 weeks from the mother's last menstrual period, LMP they call it, brainwave activity has begun. Arm and leg bones form, along with tooth buds. At 7 weeks LMP, the heart is nearly complete in its formation. The baby can hiccup, can rotate, and move his or her legs. At 8 weeks, fingers and toes are webbed but growing. Urine production and release begins. I always find this fascinating because when I was delivering my 4th child, my daughter, we had to deliver via C-section, and she's the only baby we have on video being born. And she loves it because, it's a day celebrating her. So she always asks to watch it all the time. And the kids, my boys, get a huge kick out of it because what did she do? The first thing she did as soon as she was out of my womb, she peed all over me. And the kids thought that was so funny that Gracie peed inside of mom. And I was like, you all were peeing inside of me. I just find that fascinating. At 9 weeks, the child can suck his or her thumb. The baby can actually yawn. At 10 weeks, fingernails and toenails start to grow. Fingerprints are formed, unique fingerprints are formed at 10 weeks. At 11 weeks, his or her nose and lips are completely formed. He or she can make complex facial expressions. At 12 weeks, there are taste buds present all over the child's mouth. At 13 weeks, pro-choice and pro-life scientists agree that most of the child's body is sensitive to the touch. And while you may personally like calling yourself pro-choice or naively like to agree with the my body, my choice rhetoric, to deny that human life begins at conception, that the human fetus in the womb is not a child, is just denying science, is to be a science denier. It's unbelievable. The left likes to wag their fingers at the political right for denying science when it comes to climate change or COVID-19 mask wearing. But the most absurd form of science denial in our culture is what happens every single day inside the doors of Planned Parenthood, when they end the lives of 970 preborn little baby girls and baby boys. Pro-life and pro-choice surgeons administer anesthesia to patients, human children in the womb, when they're performing surgery on those patients. After acknowledging what science proves, the only conclusion that you can draw is the result of every single abortion in America kills a defenseless human being. There's no valid argument that they're not human beings. There's no valid argument that they're not living human beings. There's none. In addition, I actually trust the pictures and the videos that current and former abortionists have shot during and after their abortion procedures. They've shot these videos to teach other doctors how to commit abortions. I trust those videos and what those pictures show us, and that every abortion is a violent end. Every abortion ends a beating heart of a human being. An abortionist actually only will know success in his or her job if a heart that was beating stops. If a beating heart continues after an abortion, that abortionist has failed in their job. They have failed to end the other human being. If you've expressed support before for abortion, one question I would have for you is, have you researched what happens in an abortion procedure? Chemical abortion is on the rise. It will soon become the #1 type of abortion in America. It's usually administered through a cocktail of drugs known as RU486. The FDA has cleared it through the 7th week of pregnancy. Planned Parenthood claims to use it through the 10th or 11th week of pregnancy. It's a synthetic steroid that blocks the hormone progesterone. So it starves the child. The child cannot grow, cannot live. And then the woman takes the second drug, a second pill at home, and that's been used to induce contractions and to expel a dead body. We call them toilet bowl abortions because the messaging that she gets from the doctor's office is, when the bleeding gets too heavy, sit on the toilet and don't look and keep flushing. If you've ever seen the movie Unplanned, which is the story of Abby Johnson, the former Planned Parenthood abortion director turned pro-life advocate, there is a very gruesome scene in that movie, which I am pleased to say I was able to get the producers to leave in that movie, that depicts her chemical abortion and the pain she felt. A suction abortion is after dilation of the cervix. A suction curette, which is a tube with a serrated tip, is inserted into the uterus. It has a suction device attached to it. It's 29 times more powerful than your household vacuum. It'll tear the baby's body apart, sucks the child through the hose in the container. This is actually the most common form of abortion, is a suction abortion. A D&C abortion is used through the 12th week dilation curettage. After dilation of the cervix, a curette is inserted into the uterus. The baby's body will be cut into pieces, extracted. Sometimes through suction, the uterine wall will be scraped to remove the placenta, the organ that grows to sustain the new human being, to confirm that the uterus is empty. This is a curette. It's a loop shape. It has a serrated, it's like a little sharp here. It's a loop shape. A D&E abortion is the most common form of second trimester abortion. It's usually committed up to 18 weeks. We have some Planned Parenthood abortionists who admit to using this abortion up to 21 weeks, but they say they're not able to use it after 21 weeks because the child's skull, by that time the bones in the child's skull are too hardened or too well formed, and it's too hard to grasp and crush. So this is forceps. These are forceps, and the Sofer clamp, really. And you can put these into the uterus after it's been dilated. It's serrated here. It's very sharp. And they lock, and they don't unlock. I actually have a description somewhere here of NAF, the National Abortion Federation's description of a D&E abortion, and it's just about as gruesome as anything you could read. But essentially what you do is you take this child, and the child is still this way, breech, and you just grasp, lock, twist, and pull. And you pull down, and you have a pouch or a pan at the end of the operating table where you collect the parts of the child. After you believe you have all the parts of the child, and you know you have the brain, which is usually is the last thing that comes out of the uterus when the white stuff comes out. They'll use this curette once again, and they'll scrape the woman's uterus, making sure the placenta has been removed as well. And then they take the pan or the pouch back to the POC lab, the products of conception lab, where they will have to put together the child to make sure there aren't pieces of the child left inside the mother, which commonly leads to the most common type of side effect from a surgical abortion, which is sepsis infection. After 20 weeks, when the baby's skull is too big to crush, it's too difficult to crush, what they're doing now is something called a heart attack abortion, where they will actually induce a child after 20 weeks, and they'll induce labor. But before they induce labor, they will give the child a heart attack. So a needle, sort of like this, similar to if you're doing amniocentesis. They'll use ultrasound technology to guide the needle through the mother's abdomen to pierce the child. They will insert a drug called digoxin, which gives the child a heart attack. She'll then be given lumeria, seaweed, to start to ripen her uterus, to prepare her to deliver her child. And she carries around her child for about 2 or 3 days. And then the hope is that she delivers a dead child. That's not always the case. If the child is born alive, what will happen then is they'll let the child die, and they will not administer care to the child. So that would be oxygen, because normally if children are born prematurely, the hardest, I have a friend right now who's dealing with the situation. Her daughter, Marigold, you can pray for her, is struggling. She was born very premature, about 24 weeks. They struggle to breathe because their lungs aren't properly formed. Your lungs as a child aren't really formed until about 36 weeks. That's why when I kept trying to ask my doctor to induce me to have my children early, because I wanted to plan, he was like, you have to wait till 36 weeks, then I can induce you. But I actually don't recommend being induced because that was super painful. I believe this violence shows us that we have to end abortion. And I actually think that it's one of the best things about our generation that we actually believe that every human life matters. And that no matter what we may call ourselves on paper, whatever label we give ourselves politically, or whatever labels you're giving yourselves these days, that's violence. Every single abortion procedure I just described to you is violence. And our generation, we believe violence is wrong. That human lives shouldn't be subjected to unnecessary violence. That's actually one of the other reasons why I believe our future is anti-abortion. All too often, I will hear remarks from those who advocate for the violence of abortion that somehow my personal inability to act against every human atrocity means that I can speak out against none. I think this logic is deeply flawed. Human life matters. That's actually the premise of the entire pro-life movement. It has been so since before 1973. And this is a message that I believe our culture is starving for. We know human life matters, regardless of whether or not we're seeing the aftermath of the COVID lockdowns and adults and children committing suicide because they're isolated or lack a sense of purpose, or when we're talking about cyberbullying. Political polarization is tearing us apart. And we have to get back at some point to the fundamental question of why do we do this? Why do we care? The anti-abortion movement is one of the only groups that continues to proclaim that every human life matters. Every human life matters. And it isn't determined by what you've achieved or even what we think you can achieve. You don't have to have any specific political views. You don't have to have a certain skin color. You don't have to be a certain gender. You don't have to be born with any certain talents. It doesn't even matter who your parents are. We believe simply because you are human, you matter. Every single one of you matters. That's the premise that we have in the pro-life movement. That's why we do this. And that's why I love so much about our generation. My generation, the millennials, your generation, Gen Z. We have the ability to be, we're unafraid to speak up, to be willing to go out and fight for human life. And what's so awesome is we're unafraid to do it. It doesn't matter our perceived lack of talent or resources or experience. We get up and do it anyway. Students for Life conducted some polling this January that, even though, if you look on the news and how they paint this generation and even the rising generation, those in high school right now, they always paint young people as gun-ho abortion activists. Millennials and Gen Z don't actually support unlimited abortion and the extreme policies that are being handed down and being enacted in Washington, D.C. right now. Almost 7 out of 10 18 to 34-year-olds, by the way, the most liberal voting bloc in America, says they want a vote on abortion-related policy in their state. Less than 2 out of 10 said they wanted unlimited abortion in all 9 months for any reason with taxpayer funding, which is the literal platform of the Democratic National Committee right now. More than 7 out of 10 support common sense limits on abortion. Millennial Gen Z taxpayers, majority of them do not want their tax dollars paying for abortions here in the US or worldwide. Almost half, this is what actually even surprised me, and I do this for a living. Almost half, a plurality of those we polled said that they did not support abortions after a heartbeat could be detected. That's every single abortion that happens today. This one was interesting. By a margin of 55 to 25%, 18 to 34-year-olds supported requiring in-person purchase of deadly chemical abortion drugs to prevent predators from getting those drugs. By a margin of 57 to 30%, our generation rejected Roe when we learned what abortion was. Well, actually, no, we didn't even tell them what abortion was. Just we told them what Roe was. So we first asked the question, do you support Roe versus Wade? Majority of those we polled said yes. And then I followed up with a simple question. Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton allow for abortion all 9 months for any reason. Then I re-asked the question, do you support Roe versus Wade? And instantly, we went from losing to winning by 1 line. If you reject abortion violence, if you're starting to reject the violence of abortion, congrats, you're in the majority. You're with us. You may not like me, but you're with me. Further, I believe our future will be anti-abortion because women are rejecting the abortion industry's gaslighting. And they're starting to speak out about the real ways abortion harmed them. They're sharing their lived experiences, talking about how the promises of big abortion were just that, empty, hollow promises. Recently, an actress from The Good Place, Jamil, she was quoted, I saw this on my Facebook page one day. She said that having a baby can just fucking ruin everything. For a lot of women, I think it was the abortion that fucking ruined everything, not the baby. Abortion harms women physically and psychologically. Physically, long-term, it can cost a woman her fertility, lead to preterm birth. If she's able to become pregnant again, short-term, it can cause things like perforated uterus, infection, hemorrhage, and much more. This is why, The second question they ask you I don't know if any of you have been pregnant, but when you go into the OB's office after they ask you how you're going to pay for delivery of your child, which I think is kind of a crass thing to ask the first day because you're kind of overwhelmed. But they're like, hey, this is how much it's going to cost. Do you want a C-section or a natural birth? And it's going to be $1,800 for natural or $2,500 for C-section. I'm like, the second question they ask you is how many births have you had? How many live births have you had? How many pregnancies have you had? How many miscarriages have you had? Spontaneous abortions. How many induced abortions have you had? Because this is common medical knowledge. The more abortions you have, the higher your risk for things like placenta previa and preterm birth. Psychologically, abortion can lead to things like suicidal ideation, PTSD, nervous disorder, substance abuse, inability to bond with children. Abortion is not great for women, and anyone telling you it is trying to sell you something. I find it fascinating that those who profit from the ending of human life, that those who profit from abortion are the ones trying to tell women that abortion is empowerment. Did you know Planned Parenthood, by the way, has sales quotas for abortions? That their clinics actually get in trouble if they don't sell so many abortions every single month? That's not helping women. That's selling something. Yet they're the ones we're supposed to trust when we talk about abortion. Thousands and thousands of women who had abortions have come forward in the past few years to tell their story. And every time they do, the message that they get from the abortion industry is sit down, shut up. Or, oh, the only reason you're experiencing guilt is because of those nasty pro-lifers over there talking about abortion. If they would just stop talking about abortion, you wouldn't feel guilt anymore. No. They look these women in the face and tell them that their lived experiences are just false. Listen to some of the stories I just pulled from Silent No More Awareness. Silent No More Awareness is an international campaign where women and men who've experienced abortion, been party to abortion, just go online and they share their stories. Many of these women and men have gone out, they've publicly given testimony, they've sent testimony into the Supreme Court, but you can go online and you can search any kind of justification for abortion that you hear, and you can read all of these stories. One story I found was from Jamie. She said, over 22 years ago, I was 20 years old living with a very abusive man and our 6-month-old baby. I was devastated when I found I was pregnant again. I could barely take care of myself and the baby, let alone another infant. I knew I couldn't stay in this toxic situation, and I couldn't see a way past the crippling fear of screwing up another life. I chose to do what we women fight for. I had an abortion. I was up all night prior, pleading with God to take the child from me so I wouldn't have to follow through. But he didn't, so I did. I was already so broken and hated myself so much that I convinced myself that it wasn't a baby, it was just a blob. I refused additional pain medicine to give me comfort. I remember it being very cold and chilling. There was no love or compassion in that room, just the sound of a blender and pain that I'm still able to feel today. I looked, and what I saw has haunted me for decades. Or Veronica. Veronica wrote, I had an abortion because my pregnancy was unplanned, and the father of the baby told me we had to have an abortion. I didn't think I could do it alone. I didn't think I'd have any support from my family because I didn't have a close relationship with them, and my finances were extremely tight. My past had taught me that men never stay, and as I never had a father figure who'd stayed in my life. During the abortion procedure, I experienced a lot of pain. The clinic staff were not helpful or kind and did not act like they cared about me at all. I have vivid memories of the things I saw, heard, and smelled that day. Immediately after the abortion, I felt regret, but I also felt relief because my crisis was over. I wanted nothing to do with the father of my baby. I wanted to be alone, and I felt disgusting. As time went on after my abortion, I stuffed my feelings as deep down as I possibly could. Though it was pushed deep down, it crept up into my relationship. It prevented me from bonding with my oldest living child because I couldn't help think that I should have already experienced all of these mom things I was experiencing with the baby I had aborted. It also put stress on my marriage, and it almost destroyed it. I also believe our future will be anti-abortion because women no longer have to believe the lie that we need abortion to succeed. Women don't have to have abortions, or women, I should say, women don't have abortions because they find it empowering. I don't know if any of you have ever gone out in front of an abortion facility on a Saturday morning to counsel, to advocate for resources, or to pray. But what goes on in front of that abortion facility is not empowerment. The women who come to that facility look scared. They're sad. It's not joy. It's not, I'm here to exercise my constitutional right to choose. It's, I just can't have my baby right now. I just can't do this right now. It's not, I'm exercising my freedom or my bodily autonomy. Those talking points never make it in front of the abortion facility. The two most common reasons why women think that they must choose abortion is because their relationship with their partner, the one who got them pregnant, is unstable, and they're financially insecure. A baby that comes into existence underscores all of the real problems that many pregnant women are facing. In the short term, you can see how it might seem easier to get rid of the child than to achieve the stability that she's lacking, or to get out of the toxic relationship she finds herself in. But ending the life of her child won't do anything to improve her situation. In fact, and what many women who've experienced abortion will say, is that it made it worse. That they stayed in the relationship longer. That they felt then that they couldn't leave. Instead of looking for ways to help women, the actual empowering thing to do, the abortion lobby doubles down on abortion. The truth is that in today's America, she doesn't have to feel like she has to choose, to make a choice between her education or her future career and her child. While things aren't perfect yet, she has more protected rights than ever before. There's actually over 800 laws that protect women in the workplace and in education. We have a society now that actually supports single mothers and doesn't condemn single motherhood. Not saying not everybody. There's thousands of pro-life pregnancy centers that vastly outnumber the number of abortion facilities in our country, and maternity homes that have been established with the singular goal to help her and are dedicated to serving her, that don't even make a profit, that don't actually make money because they're actual nonprofits, unlike Planned Parenthood, which claims to be a nonprofit, but then grosses, well, actually net over $150 million every year. They gross over $2 billion. The real people who are putting together tangible resources and solutions, real solutions, are the pro-life advocates. We're the ones who are finding housing, childcare, providing emotional support, helping her find medical care, maternity assistance, job placement, parenting classes, connections to community resources. Now, I know when we speak in the pro-life movement about a future without the right to legal abortion, it does seem scary to many. I mean, all of us here, I think all of us here were born after 1973. We actually have never lived in a country without legal abortion. And I actually think this is the greatest challenge the pro-life movement faced. It's not proving the humanity of the child. Check, done, science, technology does that. It's not proving the violence of the abortion industry. They do that themselves all the time when they go and speak about abortion. It's not convincing our generation or Americans to care that human life matters. Check, we already got that. The greatest challenge I think we face in the movement is lack of awareness. In fact, the same poll that I mentioned earlier, after we asked about viewpoints on abortion, about knowledge of abortion, we asked about knowledge of resources. And what we found was shocking. 2 out of 10 knew where to refer a friend who was pregnant and didn't want to have an abortion but needed help. 2 out of 10. We have more than 3,000 pregnancy centers and maternity homes across the country. We have more than 8,000 federally qualified health centers, FQHCs, that are already taxpayer funded, that perform every single service that Planned Parenthood performs, minus abortion, plus a whole bunch more, and yet nobody ever knows what an FQHC is. We have all of these things, but all she knows is Planned Parenthood. I think this is our greatest challenge in the pro-life movement. If you gave me $1 billion today, and I'm always looking for that person who's going to give me $1 billion. One of these days it's going to happen. But if you gave me $1 billion today to end abortion, to end legal abortion in our country, 900 million of it would go into marketing, advertising, to say this is our plan, this is why this is our plan, and here's where you can go. I think our movement is a little bit alike. When I was writing this presentation, I was thinking about the first time I took all 4 of my children to Yellowstone. And we were living in Minnesota at the time. And so we had to get, in one day, 12 hours from our home in St. Paul to Billings, Montana. And I'm a planner. I'm a type A personality, in case you haven't been able to tell. So I made a plan for everything. We were eating paleo, so I made like breakfast, lunch, and dinner for like the whole 2 weeks we were gone. Every single meal, every spice we would need, what I was gonna bring, what I was gonna buy when we got there. I figured out how much, clothes every kid needed, socks, underwear, which if you've ever done this for 4 people, well, it's actually 6 human beings, it's a lot of freaking work. Just let me share with that. I had to figure out everyone's toys. I went and bought DVD players for the car, which crapped out like middle of North Dakota, and I had to go to Walmart, get another one, and it crapped out by the time I got to Billings. It was a disaster. That was before iPads. I did everything I could possibly think of to make the trip as painless as possible. I printed out good behavior tokens. I got prizes at the Dollar General store. So when the kids were good, after if they got a little token, they could redeem it for a prize. I really thought this out. But there was one thing I forgot when we were preparing, and it would have cost me like 2 minutes of time and like 50 cents, right, on printer ink. I didn't print out a map for my kids. I printed out a little activity book, word search, pictures to color, but I should have printed out a map that said, here's our house in Minnesota with like a big star, and put a big star where we're going, and put little dots at every time we were going to stop for pee breaks or we're going to stop to eat. Because my children, some of them are type A like me, they want to know what the plan is and when they're going to stop, where we're going, and they didn't have that. And they couldn't read yet, so I couldn't just like hand them a map. And not doing that failure of mine cost so many phrases of "Are we there yet? How much longer?" And when you become a parent, if you're a parent, it is the most annoying thing when you're in the car. And I travel a lot with my kids. I went to Florida, came back, came down here today. I drove 8 hours with them. It's very annoying. Next trip to Yellowstone, I had it covered. And I kind of think that's what happens in the pro-life movement. That we have a vision for what we want for our country. We want abortion to be illegal. We want abortion to be unthinkable. And we are fierce in saying it. We are working towards that day for a post-war America, of setting up the resources we need. And we've been doing that for decades. But I think we've failed to bring everybody else along with us. To say, here's our plan. And this is why it's our plan. It's not so scary. And this is where we're going. I think that's on us as a pro-life movement. I think we need to print out the plan. That's why I'm okay saying this, even if it's a little scary to some, because I think this needs to be said. I think we need to be very forthright with what our intentions are. I hate when I do a newspaper interview for like the Washington Post or some other liberal outlet, and they'll ask me a question, and they'll read back to me what another like pro-life leader had said, and I could tell that pro-life leader was carefully choosing their words. And I'm just like, okay, so either I can go along with what they said, or I can say what our actual intention is. Our actual intention is, yes, we want to ban all abortions. While we might be fighting today to ban painful second and third trimester abortions when scientists know a child can feel excruciating pain, you're right, Mr. Washington Post reporter, I am not going to stop there. I feel like we try to be like very careful, like, ooh, we don't want to like say, and I think that costs us. I think that costs us in our credibility. I think people go, well, obviously they want to ban all abortions. That's why they do this. I think we need to be open and honest about that and talk about our plan. So, I don't know. I think that's where we're at in the pro-life movement. I think that's what we need to focus on. I think unless you're willing to be a science denier, you've got to be with us that abortion ends a unique whole living human life. Unless you're willing to discount all of the training from the National Abortion Federation, from abortionists across the country, you have to admit that every single abortion is an act of violence. If you're a Christian, if you're a decent human being, you got to admit human beings have value and worth. So I think you should be with us in the anti-abortion movement. I don't care what your label is. I don't care what your political party may be. I want you to join us because it's going to take all of us to get to there. So if you have questions, you can line up, ask me one question, and if you have a second question, get to the back of the line. If you disagreed or I pissed you off, that's great. You can go first and just skip the people who look like they're agreeing with me because it's more fun that way.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, when you say you want to ban all abortion, does that mean like every single procedure, or would that leave victims of rape and when the health of the mother is at risk, would that include those cases?
Yeah, I'm going to answer your question, but can I ask you a question first? Yeah. Are you against abortion?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. So I am against abortion, and I think you will find within the pro-life movement, our argument would be that all abortions should be banned. The only type of procedure that should be allowed is if a woman's life is at risk, that she could die if she continues to carry her child to term. That's actually wouldn't be considered though an abortion. And it's about physician intent at that moment. And so the goal, I have some friends who are OBGYNs and who are pro-life, and so they actually get the hardest cases assigned to them because the women who have high-risk pregnancies are told by other OBs to go ahead and abort, and if these women don't want to abort, they have to find a pro-life doctor who's willing to treat them. And so when you have a high-risk situation like this, what usually you have to do, one is as a doctor, start off knowing that you have two patients, and then you treat both patients. And your goal is to get to the end of the pregnancy with both patients alive. If it gets to the point in a pregnancy, and usually this is past 20 weeks, the goal in a high-risk pregnancy is to get her, she usually goes on bed rest, to get her as far along in gestation as possible, to give that child every single chance for his or her lungs to develop. If it gets to the point where she's at 23 or 24 weeks and she no longer can remain pregnant, what they will do is they will take her via C-section and they will birth the child and then have the NICU there and have every support service there. That is not an abortion. The child may die. She knows that, the doctor knows that, but the intent is not to purposely destroy a human life. There is no condition that a woman has that you have to insert digoxin into the heart of a child and cause a cardiac arrest. There's no condition for that. If a woman can no longer remain pregnant, you birth the child and you give that child every chance of life, even knowing that there's a great risk that the child won't survive. But that's about the intent of the physician. When you're talking about cases of sexual assault, the reason I asked you that question is how you feel about abortion, is I actually feel that those who support abortion are sort of disingenuous when they ask this question, because often I get asked this question every single place I speak at, and it's almost like we use women who've survived sexual assault to justify all abortions. And I think that's actually a very terrible position, because I've actually asked those who will say, well, I can't believe you're so extreme. You don't support abortion even in cases of rape. And I'll say, okay, let's put that aside. I will work with you. Will you work with me to ban all other abortions, all the 97, 98% of abortions that don't take place because of sexual assault, incest, or life murder? And I have never found someone who supports abortion who's willing to do that. So rape always comes up as a justification for all 1 million abortions that occur every single year, but no one's actually ever willing to say, let's put that aside. Like, I support, and I will support, restrictive legislation in states that ban abortions, but allow abortions in certain circumstances, even though I disagree with it, because I'm a pragmatist. And if I can save 97 babies out of 100 and all 100 are doomed for death, I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to go back for those other 3. So yeah, and you can disagree with me about that. Pro-lifers actually disagree about the strategy of that. But I think that's a very pragmatic position. But I do think in the pro-life movement and just in humanity in general, we should be willing to do everything possible to help women who've survived sexual assault. But my help stops when you ask me to take the life of another human being. Thank you. Other questions? See, I'm not that scary. My kids might disagree, but.
Hi, thank you for your talk. It was really good, and I appreciate how bold you are on the issue of life. I guess my question is, I think it's really easy to be defensive when because we face a lot of opposition in the pro-life movement, but how do you balance coming across as abrasive and like being known for coming across as abrasive with being bold and courageous for life?
I mean, one, I actually think that's kind of a sexist argument. I'm not calling you sexist, but it's very interesting. Like, I'll go to a campus and I'll like be in a passionate debate with somebody about abortion, and they're like, "Oh, she's such a bitch," but then a man does it, and it's like totally fine. But because I'm a woman, apparently, like my femininity changes. Like, it's very interesting, but it is. But as a woman, I actually have to be very careful about how I come across, because I can come across as abrasive. Like, I'm a very like matter-of-fact person, and I can insult people very easily. So I think you just have to know your personality and you know the truth. I think it's hard sometimes if you're new to the pro-life movement. Like, when you first discover the violence that's happening inside Planned Parenthoods every day, like, we have a DBW training at Students for Life, don't be weird, because I remember when I first learned about abortion, like, all I wanted to do every day is like, how can we not be talking about abortion? Because, oh my gosh, like 970 babies are dying every single day. And so you got to be able to present that, but without overpowering the argument and letting people think. And I think the way we describe it to students and the way I think about it often is I remember when I first became pro-life, I felt like my job was to convert every single person I talked to. And like, I could not stop talking to you until you agreed with me, which then gets you to like be more in their face and more abrasive. I think what you have to think about it as is you're planting the seed. And most people aren't going to admit to you that you were right and they were wrong. Now, I get emails after presentations at schools, right? Or I'll get like an Instagram message. But most people aren't gonna come up to you and say, oh my gosh, you just said this thing and it totally changed my abortion. My job is to plant a seed and to show you the truth that I hope at some point you will accept. And so I think that actually helps when you first always tell newbie pro-lifers, like, your job isn't to convert every single person. And if you think that that's your job, you're going to freak people out. Your job is to plant the seed of truth and then let truth take its course. Because truth, I mean, like, how many scripture verses do you need? Like, light always defeats darkness. If you take a candle into a dark room, darkness has no choice to flee. And so I have nothing to fear because I know truth is on our side. Science is on our side. It's just up to you as to whether or not you are going to accept the facts that are being presented. Does that help?
Yeah, that does. I have another question too. I was wondering how you deal with people you don't necessarily agree. Well, you agree with the fact that they believe that the future is anti-abortion, but you don't agree with their approach within the pro-life movement. Like, I'm thinking of like the abolitionist movement.
Yeah, they hate me. Yeah. I'm also Roman Catholic, so then I'm like a papist, and they're like ads like I'm a woman. And I'm a Catholic, and they disagree with me. So like they like come after me for all these things because they're just like a bunch of sexist assholes. But yeah, and hopefully this goes on Facebook. So yeah, two people frustrate me the most. People who disagree with me about abortion do not make me mad, do not frustrate me. because I actually feel bad for them. Either they're hurting from a past abortion or they're just refusing to accept actual facts. So actually I have sympathy for those people. The people that frustrate me the most, and you can ask my staff and anybody who knows me this, are Christians, people who say that they're Christian, who are active in their faith and purposely continue to promote the violence of abortion. Does not go, I have a very hard time with that because they're purposely choosing to ignore what their faith is telling them. And then people who proclaim to be against abortion, but then, and say that all human life has value, but then treat those, even on the same side, political side as they are, as if they don't have any human value. And that's exactly what like abolitionists and, you know, they actually act like I don't have value. I'm not have human dignity because they disagree with my tactics at Students for Life. So, yeah.
Yeah, that helps. Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Hi.
Hi, I'm Jeff Rains, a Bellarmine student. I wanted to know how someone like me would be able to get involved in organizations that help pregnant women and also maybe provide like housing services, or they might work with adoption agencies. Like, how would I be able to do that? Like, what kind of qualifications would I need?
Yeah, well, one, turn around, Alex, put up your hand, talk to Alex, because you need to get involved in the Students for Life group here because they have all the connections with the local pregnancy centers. In fact, you guys have a fantastic pregnancy center right here in Louisville who is amazing. So you can get connected with them. You don't actually have to have any qualifications to like get in the pro-life movement. You might, you just have to have, I guess, a spirit to serve and say, where do you need me? Do you need me painting, the pregnancy center? Or do you need me organizing the supply shelf? Or do you need me fixing your computer and teaching the volunteers at the center how to do accounting? That's what's so great about the pro-life movement is like, no matter what your like skill set or your talents may be, if you're an introvert or you're an extrovert, there is a place for, if you're an artist, like there is something for you in the pro-life movement because it's such a vast movement. So get connected with Alex, and you can get connected with the local pregnancy center movement here that's doing a fantastic job of supporting moms and babies.
Hi. First, I want to say you're one of my biggest inspirations, and so it's just an honor to have you here. My question is, so I'm a music major, and I'm also involved in theater, and I'm like one of very few conservatives, and I wanted to know what more could I do to sort of like spread the pro-life message around my friends, and just without being shut down or without being like ostracized, just like trying to get them to hear the message of like why I believe what I believe and why we believe that abortion is wrong.
I would say one of the things you can do that's super easy is like I always tell people to wear like pro-life t-shirts or put pro-life decals on your laptop or a pro-life patch in your backpack or your water bottle. Whatever you can do to kind of like spark a discussion and try to pick something that's like, that's a little, spark a conversation, for example, because people will ask, and sometimes people will be like, wait, what? You're one of those antis? And then that opens the door for you to be like, I'm anti-abortion because I believe abortion is, the world's greatest human rights atrocity, and every single abortion is a violent act that ends the life of a unique, whole living human being. Bam. That's going to start a discussion. And I think you should, prepare like your elevator pitch. What I just said, have like 2 sentences of why you're pro-life. If you have a personal experience or you know someone who's personally been involved in an abortion decision, say that. I'm pro-life because I believe every single abortion ends in the life of a human being. And I want to tell you about my friend's sister, roommate, who had an abortion and what it did for her and meant for her. Because I think that's so powerful to like be able to share your story and how you've come to the movement. If you're like a Democrat or a liberal or atheist or whatever, make sure you put that on the bumper sticker too, because that always gets people like, because they always expect like people like me, white conservatives, to be pro-life, and then you're like, oh, but they're not all like that. I think that actually starts the conversation more sometimes because there's a very specific stereotype of who pro-lifers are. And so, yeah, just have something to be ready to say that, or be ready in class if it comes up, or a teacher makes a snide remark. Be ready to say, I disagree with what you just said, professor, whatever. I'm sure there's opportunities, even in music classes, where a comment will be made about Donald Trump and all of his anti-life policies. And you can say, I want to talk about that, because let's talk about that, for example, because do you know what's happening in Washington, D.C. right now? So I think there's a way to start that discussion, but just have your little 2-sentence, why are you pro-life? And that will help start the discussion. I think the most common misconception is I can't talk about being pro-life unless I know every single answer. You're not going to know every single answer. And sometimes I'll get asked a question on campus and I'm like, I've never thought about it that way. And let me get back to you. And I think that's actually one of the best things you can do. If someone asks you a question you don't know, just say, I want to answer it, but let me get some facts straight and I'll come back to you tomorrow. I actually think that earns a lot of respect, because they know that you're actually seriously considering their argument. And that's what people want, right? When you're having a discussion, they want you to actually consider and not just be like, oh, bodily autonomy. Oh, here's the talking point. They don't want just a quick 30-second. They want you actually thinking about what they said. They want to be heard. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay. And listen to my podcast, by the way.
Every day.
Oh, there we go. So my podcast gives lots of great. I interview people way more talented than I am. So.
Hi, I have a few related questions, if that's okay. It's just 2.
Okay.
Do you think that the crisis of pregnancy stops after the child is born?
No.
Okay, so you gave the example of Veronica was one of the stories that you
Mm-hmm.
read, and I remember specifically some of the words she used was that she had little support from her family, she didn't
Yep.
have her partner in the picture, that she had really few finances. So
Mm-hmm.
my main question for you was that given that all abortion becomes illegal, what kind of next steps would you improve them,
Mm-hmm.
and how would you go about improving it?
Yeah, so I think that's actually was my speech last year, was preparing for a post-Roe America, of what is actually our blueprint in the pro-life movement. What support services do we actually need to have in place? And that's what we're actively working towards in the pro-life movement. So that's why we have 3,000 pregnancy centers, maternity homes. I actually think if Roe were reversed today, or if my goal and dream of every single Planned Parenthood would shut down today, do we actually have the resources in place to help women? And the answer is yes. Every fairly qualified health center in America would only have to see 2 more patients per week, because Planned Parenthood sees 2.1 million patients. Fairly qualified health centers routinely every year see over 21 million Americans. The challenge, as I said earlier, is that people don't know these resources exist. I actually think that's our biggest challenge as we head into a future that's anti-abortion, is we, all of us, pro-life and pro-abortion, have to do a better job of talking about what the resources are. That's my actual big fear, is that if Roe were overturned, not that we wouldn't have the resources, but she wouldn't know they would exist. And we have to be the ones connecting her to those resources. Does that help?
It does. Specifically with adoption, though,
Mm-hmm.
specifically in America, I know a lot of nuclear white American families wouldn't necessarily go to American adoption agencies to adopt. They would go to a different country that might be in more need. So how would you improve adoption agencies in America?
Well, I think we have to actually improve our adoption and foster care system in America. So we have a piece of legislation that our C4, Students for Life Action, our sister organization, has created and sponsored, and we almost got passed last year. We actually had a pro-choice and a pro-life senator in Virginia co-sponsor. It was fantastic. But it was actually about changing the rules in the state of Virginia, because home studies are often the biggest kind of hurdle. It takes a lot of time. You have to wait for the home studies to be conducted. These are safety studies to make sure a home is safe for foster children or children who are adopted to enter. And it takes a lot of time because there's not enough social workers to do them. And so our legislation, which was budget neutral, so it was conservative friendly, and it just said if you are someone in the state who the state has already entrusted the care of minors, so firemen, police officer, teacher, physician, you should be able to get trained to volunteer your services to do home study visits. I think that's actually a huge step in the right direction to actually speed up the process, because that is why you often see families who try to go overseas, because the process is too cumbersome here in America. The other thing is something that we've been talking with some state legislators about this term has been state adoption tax credits. One, the federal adoption tax credit doesn't come near the cost of paying for an adoption, but most states actually don't have a state adoption tax credit, and we actually have to correct that. So there is actually a lot of things. I mean, honestly, the challenge is freaking lawyers. And it is a money-making industry. Just like how abortion is a money-making industry, becoming a foster parent, becoming an adoptive parent is a money-making industry, and a lot of people make money from that. And that's a commodization of children, and that needs to stop. But it's a systemic problem for sure.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
So I have a couple of questions
Sure.
too. So kind of going off of what Becca and then he just said, I just had a question. So a recent UK study showed that 97% of women actually experience sexual harassment, and then about 1 in 5 experience some form of sexual assault. If abortion was abolished today, what would you say to victims of sexual assault, like the 11-year-old in Ohio who was forced to carry the fetus of their assailant?
Yeah. I mean, if I was speaking to a woman who survived sexual assault, I think the first conversation I had with her wouldn't be about abortion, it would be about her.
Yeah.
How can I help you? How can I support you? What is it that you need? And I think we as a pro-life movement, and we as just decent human beings, regardless of how you feel about abortion, should be willing to do everything possible to help her. Get onto the path of healing, survive the sexual assault, become a survivor. But I am not willing to kill. I'm not willing to end the life of another human being. My question to you or anybody who supports abortion in cases of sexual assault is, do you think there's anything less extreme we could prescribe than the killing of another human being in that case?
Well, I think when it's an 11-year-old, I mean, she was raped by her uncle, trigger warning, obviously, but she was assaulted by her uncle, so it's an incest child as well, and she's being forced to kind of go through labor, which can be incredibly taxing on.
That's actually not true. So when it's an 11-year-old, they shouldn't be forced. And if you talk to any like pro-life OB/GYN, they would say they would never want to force an 11-year-old because they physically, like their cervix isn't developed enough to be able to like push a child out. So you would induce, and you would have a C-section at that moment to deliver a
So
child.
unfortunately, legislators in Ohio did not agree with that. So that was my question.
Well, I mean, I know some of those legislators in Ohio. One's actually on our board, and Christina would never say that an 11-year-old should be forced to push a child out of her vagina. They would say a child who is pregnant should be able to deliver via C-section.
Unfortunately, that just wasn't the case. And then kind of going off of what Rebecca said as well, does your definition of pro-life only include abolishing abortion, or do you also support like abolishing the death penalty and supporting healthcare movements, as well as like advocating for the abolition of the genocide of the Uyghur Muslims in China?
Or Uyghur.
Yes, sorry, I have a speech impediment, so it happens.
Yeah, so we, as the pro-life movement, we advocate against abortion, euthanasia, and assisted suicide, and embryo-destructive stem cell research. We are very clear that's our mission. At Students for Life, 99% of the things we talk about are going to be just abortion. In fact, that's why I actually call ourselves anti-abortion, because I actually think it makes it more clear. We're actually a very diverse movement. So I disagree with the death penalty. I disagree with Obamacare, because I think it's one of the greatest disruptors to the best healthcare system in the world. And it's going to lead to more people dying and suffering. But that doesn't mean that I shouldn't be a part of the pro-life movement. Or if you believe that socialized medicine and socialism is somehow a savior to the world, that you shouldn't be in the pro-life movement and join us in fighting abortion. Because we can actually disagree about other policy initiatives, but we can work together to say all human lives matter, and we're going to focus on the lives of these preborn children. Any other questions? No other questions? Come on down.
One of the biggest obstacles I faced with talking to students about pregnancy resource centers and resources available to pregnant women is that they're primarily they're religiously affiliated.
Yep.
How would you recommend like overcoming that obstacle in a conversation?
Well, I mean, I don't think someone's religion should like deter you from working with them. Like,
My question is, like, I'm talking to another student who's not religious.
sure.
And they wouldn't want to go, or they feel like they wouldn't be welcomed at a pregnancy resource center because they're not
Yeah.
religious.
I don't know of any pregnancy center who has a religious mission statement, who doesn't have a religious mission statement, that wouldn't serve a patient who wasn't religious. Like, that's not really what their personal religious convictions might be what caused them to start the pregnancy center, but that's not like, I mean, I know when I volunteered and served in a pregnancy center and counseled women, I actually only ever talked about religion, metaphysics, God, if she brought up God. I never brought God into the conversation at all, because I actually think we have a pretty damn good scientific and philosophical argument against abortion that we don't actually have to bring in a metaphysical. We can. I think that explains why we believe human beings have value. Because if you don't have, that basis, it gets kind of like, well, why do human beings have value? That's a metaphysical question. But yeah, I think that I would tell someone I'm talking to with, like, they're going to serve you. Like, that's actually their job, is to serve you and people that disagree with them all the time. And if they don't serve you, then they shouldn't be in a business. Like, yeah. And like, don't discriminate against Christians. Like, I also find that interesting too, is like, sometimes people are like, well, I'm not going to go there because they're a bunch of Christians. So you discriminate against people, a whole group of people, because of their religious beliefs. Like, what type of person does that make you? But I wouldn't tell that to someone in crisis, because obviously they don't need more trauma.
My question was with the second and third trimester, the digoxin abortion, and you had said that if it's failed, the abortion's left, or the infant's left to die. So is that a state-by-state law, or is it like what happened in Planned Parenthood stays in Planned Parenthood? Because I thought there was like some.
Yeah, so we tried to pass a federal infanticide ban, and every single Democrat has stopped that in Washington, D.C. from being passed. So we actually don't have, it's called Born Alive Infant Protection Act, which would mandate that if a child is born alive inside an abortion facility, the abortionist, the team at the abortion facility, has a duty to call EMS, and it has a duty to provide life-sustaining care to that newborn. Every single Democrat on Capitol Hill voted against that, except for, I think, Dan Lipinski, but he got primaried by his own party for being too pro-life. So, it's actually quite outrageous. The abortion lobby's argument was that, they can't argue for that. I mean, think about from their side. They're arguing that a child should be able to be killed until a child takes the first breath. So if a child delivered, except for the head, these are people that argue that as long as the head is in the woman's vagina, but the limbs, the torso of the child are outside of the womb, it's not a human being. So they can't actually argue that there's any difference between a child like that and child seconds later. And they're being philosophically consistent with their position, which is there is no fundamental difference between a child who's being delivered like this and a child a few seconds later. All you're arguing is location. So yeah, we've tried. Some states have passed laws, but there's no federal protections.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Hi, so I heard a rumor that about like 20 years ago, companies like Pepsi would use aborted fetuses as like flavor enhancers for their drinks. Is that true?
I heard that too. I believe they were doing testing. So they use stem cells to test, and some of the stem cells, so for example, vaccines have become into question. So the entire pro-abortion, this is what I find ironic. The entire pro-abortion movement said, pro-lifers are crazy to say vaccines are made from aborted stem cells. These are science deniers, sit down, shut up, they're anti-vaxxers, right? You're crazy if you believe that. Then Mike Pence, Vice President Mike Pence, because, Operation Warp Speed got a vaccine developed in record-breaking time that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden said they would never take, they wouldn't trust it, but then they got elected, they took the vaccine. Mike Pence goes, before he's out of office, gets the vaccine. And the article in Politico in Washington, D.C. is, Mike Pence takes vaccine made with aborted stem cells. He's inconsistent with his pro-life beliefs. So, yeah, there are vaccines. There are taste testing, whatever they've done with Pepsi. They use stem cells from aborted children. Those stem cell lines were derived in the 60s and 50s. There was, thanks to President Bush, a ban on deriving more aborted stem cells. So, for example, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine for COVID-19 was made using the stem line of an aborted child. The Moderna vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine was not. However, we do not know whether or not those vaccines, when they made them, were tested on the aborted stem cell lines. We think that they were. And so there's great division right now in the pro-life movement as to whether or not you can take the COVID vaccine. But other vaccines, so like I think the MMR was developed using stem lines of aborted fetal stem cells. Now the Catholic Church will say that you're not being complicit in that, and that it is ethical to still take those vaccines, even though they were derived off the stem cells of other human beings.
Okay, so like, would that stuff be still happening right now? And would you like fight against it if like companies were still using stem cells to?
Yeah, we do. I mean, that's why we've been speaking. I actually had a whole podcast episode a couple weeks ago about the COVID vaccines and what pro-lifers need to know. And the diocese, I think, of New Orleans came out and said that parishioners in their diocese should not take the Johnson & Johnson vaccine because there are other ethical alternatives that were derived not using aborted fetal stem cells. Yet the Johnson & Johnson team decided to use those derived stem cell lines, and it shouldn't have done that. It's absolutely horrific. Think about it from any other perspective, like replace aborted child with, I don't know, a person who was experimented on Auschwitz and say, oh, we derived it from their stem cells. Like no human being would say, oh yeah, that's totally fine. Totally fine. But because we've dehumanized the preborn child, we're like, it's just a fetus. No, that was a little boy or that was a little girl that had a name. And we're deriving all of our vaccines, and they're using those stem cells for other kind of testing, like you mentioned with the Pepsi and the Mountain Dew. Yeah. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news on that one.
Hey, Kristan, thanks for coming out and talking to us this evening. I guess I just would like to hear from your perspective and your experience, if you could give us the best pro-choice argument and then just like dismantle it, like go like Thomas Aquinas on us.
I think the pro-choice argument that trips up pro-lifers the most is the argument for bodily autonomy. That a woman has a right to her body, and that saying that abortion should be illegal is harmful to her autonomy. And I mean, that's the argument we hear all the time, and it's in various forms. But that's what it basically comes down to: my body, my choice. And I think that's one that a lot of folks, especially men, pro-life men, kind of clam up on, like, oh, I don't have a uterus, so I shouldn't talk. No, first of all, arguments don't have gender, so you can argue about anything regardless of your gender. But I think that that's the number one that you would hear, and a lot of people get nervous about. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. Like, it's not your body, your choice. There's actually another human body that we're talking about. And as I said earlier, like, to deny that there's another human body is just simply science denial, that there is actually another human person. And we actually do have limits on our rights, to what we can do with our body. And we as a society accept that. My children have cystic fibrosis. You cannot go on to a pulmonary ward in a hospital and start smoking. If you do, you will be arrested, and I will be the one calling the cops on you. Why? Because your ability to do whatever the hell you want to do with your body and, blacken up your lungs stop when it hurts my children. There are a lot of things that we as a society say, your right to do whatever the hell you want with your body stops when it affects another human person. That's a short, succinct answer, but yeah.
Appreciate it.
Hi, it's me
Hi.
again. Something that you said triggered another question.
Sure.
So obviously, I'm a Black woman, and my question to you would be how to, as a pro-life advocate, sort of reach out to the Black community, because abortion is basically propagandized to my demographic. I'm 25, and we're living in just such a raunch culture and a raunch society. And I saw Planned Parenthood's tweet that's celebrating Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion.
Yeah.
And that is what's being advertised to young girls as cool. I'm a big believer in abstinence. And I was actually watching your video last night where you're talking about statistically married religious people are having the best sex.
Yeah, we actually have fantastic sex.
But that's not promoted.
Science proves it too. Studies prove it.
But you know,
And
like,
you can look at our minivans full of children to prove that clearly we have a lot of it.
yeah. But as this society proves, Twitter proves, people are very impressionable. This generation's very impressionable, and people like Cardi B are cool, and promiscuous sex and casual sex is promoted. So like, how, as a Black woman, to speak to other people in my demographic, other young Black women, to get them on board with the pro-life message that the reason why Planned Parenthood was started was basically due to eugenics and Margaret Sanger, and how we're still only 12 to 13% of the population, and how the nuclear family has been destroyed. You know, those sorts of things I find that people my age are not willing to listen to or sort of brush off because it's been like painted with a liberal stroke or like a feminist stroke.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could call that Cardi B performance at the Grammys like the opposite of empowerment. The fact that she felt the need to go on stage and do that to get sales of her records and to get media attention proves that we have something fundamentally wrong with our society, because I was just selling her body. That's the opposite of feminism. And I would say abortion is the opposite of feminism. It's the opposite of empowerment, because it tells women you can't. Planned Parenthood literally tells women you can't. You aren't strong enough to finish your education and become a parent or to place with adoptive family. You're not strong enough to do it. Here, let us help you. And by the way, we'll make money doing it. And you're right, like every talking point you just said is right. Planned Parenthood was founded by a racist eugenicist who only, after the Black Lives Matter movement started this summer, only then in 2020 did they suddenly disavow. Even the Natural Portrait Gallery, the Smithsonian, still has the bust of Margaret Sanger. And they still celebrate. They literally only changed the name of the Margaret Sanger Square in New York City because of the Black Lives Matter. And suddenly people started worrying about being called racist. And Planned Parenthood in DC put this big banner up, Black Lives Matter. Yeah, preborn Black Lives Matter too. And every single day, Planned Parenthood ends the lives of 360 Black preborn lives. So they were just afraid, right? Like, oh, we got to get on this bandwagon before they call us out on our shit that we've been promoting for over 100 years and have known and actually tried to justify. And you can download their one-pager that they put out in like 2016, attempting to it used to be on their website until like 3 months ago. They used to justify Margaret Sanger's beliefs of, well, everybody in the early 1900s was a racist. Everybody was a eugenicist. She was just a woman of her day. Yeah, speaking at KKK rallies, women's auxiliary KKK rallies. Yeah, so you know the facts. I think you continue to speak them, and I think your voice actually matters more than mine does. And I think you need to continue to speak out. And I think like what we just launched at Students for Life this past year is our HBCU program, trying to start more Students for Life groups at HBCUs and say we need to have an actual conversation about abortion. And we don't really care, like once again, I don't care what your political label is or whatever label you adopt. We need to discuss this because, I mean, the facts are right there. This is the opposite of empowerment. 80% of Planned Parenthoods are in a walkable minority neighborhood. I mean, it's like every fact is stacked up to show that they are clearly targeting Black and minority women with abortions, with the guise of, we're just trying to help these women get out of poverty. Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, like, if you want to have that argument, and she already has other children, you actually should advocate for killing the already born children, because those children take up more resources and cost more money than the preborn children. Like, why aren't you advocating for that? So, yeah, I think you just need to continue doing what you're doing. Like, there's not, I don't think there's like a silver bullet to it. I saw, and we even saw like in this political election, there was the highest number of like Black men who voted Republican in like decades. That was pretty significant, and showed that folks were starting to listen to another side and just saying, well, I can't just vote Democrat or vote liberal because I'm Black. And I think we need to kind of steep into that culture of like, look, just because you're Black doesn't mean you need, or you are forced to adopt all these labels. And if someone says you do, you need to question who's talking to you. So I think you need to continue doing what you're doing. And we need to continue to find more people like you to speak out. Because like I said, I think your voice matters more than mine. So, and you probably could have just done the speech way better than me. So there you go.
So in the beginning of your speech, did you say that you were a Christian, just out of curiosity?
Alex did in my bio. I did not.
Okay. Would you personally proclaim yourself to be an active Christian, practicing Christian? Okay. And so then you believe that Christians are called to be the frontline workers to speak the truth in love. Is that correct? So then do you think that the church is doing everything that it could, both locally and globally, to protect future mothers or current mothers, and also to protect the preborn and kids?
When you talk about the church, are you talking about the Catholic Church, or are you talking about Christians as a whole?
I'm talking about the global church. So I'm talking about anybody that would consider themselves saved.
No, you have the majority of mainline Protestant denominations actually advocate for legalized abortion. So no, big failure.
I would 100% agree with you. Okay, I'm glad you said that. So then what do you think would be your largest conviction or shout out to the church to say, this is what you need to do better. I want to see a significant increase in this?
One, be unafraid to say human lives matter and abortion is violence and wrong. And then be willing to actually put your money where your mouth is. Do you have a pro-life ministry? Do you have a post-abortive ministry? Are you working with your local pregnancy center, your local maternity homes? Are you advertising those community resources within your church? I mean, I think some of the most devastating conversations I've personally had is we'll go in the summer to these Protestant, they're like mostly Protestant Christian like rock concerts, and I've had some horrific conversations with people. I had this one woman, I'll never forget, up on King's Fest up by Buffalo, and she came up to me crying because, and I was just there signing up students because we were trying to recruit students to start Students for Life groups, and came up to me crying and saying, my daughter almost had an abortion. Her husband's a preacher in Marco Island, very fancy island off of Naples, Florida. It's like super expensive to live there. And her daughter grew up knowing abortion was wrong, went to college freshman year, got pregnant by some, not so nice guy. Guy told her she had to have an abortion, offered to pay for it. He's, very nice guy, willing to pay for it. And she almost had an abortion. And it was because there was somebody outside praying at the Planned Parenthood that said, like, I'll help you, that she ended up calling her mom from outside that Planned Parenthood that day. And she started talking. She showed me pictures of her granddaughter. And it was so, and this, she was lucky. I have met so many former Christians on campuses who were women who grew up in the church, who then got pregnant, who their parents, who were active in the church, then drove them to the abortion facility because their parents were ashamed of them. And then the women were like, what the hell, I'm not for this Christianity thing. And I think that is the big call to the church is, one, be unafraid to call violence violence and speak out against it. But then two, be willing to understand that women are going to get pregnant. We all sin, and not all of us subscribe to abstinence, and there's going to be unplanned pregnancies. And it's like, how do you deal with that in your church? how do you talk about that in your church? Like so many like pastors, like youth pastors that we talk to are like, oh, we don't talk about abortion here. I'm like, but you should, because if you're not talking about, how are they hearing that it's okay, that pregnancy is not a sin, and that there's somebody willing to support her? And if you're not talking about it, she's going to naturally think you're not with her, that you don't support her. I love your questions, by the way.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Hi, so I've been doing some research about dieting and ways
I
of
started today,
ways
but
of-
go ahead.
ways of eating healthy. So, but the problem is that I see a lot of food pantries and a lot of like food services that, yeah, I know their intention is great, like they're trying to feed people, but I feel like a lot of the food that we're giving them is like really bad for you, and I think it still plays into the pro-life movement, because we want people to be healthy, and we want we want lives to be ethical, because there are some foods out there that, believe it or not, can cause infertility and can like really affect horrible health matters. And with someone like me who I think that I know a lot about with dieting and stuff, how would I be able to play a conviction and go to these like food pantries and say, hey, we need to change up what kind of food we're giving to people so that we can give them the right kind of food and like help them out in that sort of way? Like, how would I be able to jumpstart that and have people respect me and believe me in that kind of way?
All right. Well, food science isn't my thing. I'm totally about people who don't have food eating healthy food, though. So I'm totally supportive of food banks. I think you just go and show up and say, hey, I have this idea for, let's get Panera Bread to donate their unused lettuce every night to the soup kitchen. And I think it's like baby steps like that. I actually think there are national groups out there who are actually working towards the challenges that those who are experiencing hunger face when they finally do get food to sustain them. That it's healthy food for sure.
Like, would I have to have like a bachelor's degree or something?
No.
To like.
That's the whole point. Like, you don't have to have a special fancy degree to like get your ass active and start serving. You just have to show up. Honestly, it's just showing up. So whatever you're passionate about, if this is how you want to serve your community, then go. Start serving in a local food bank. Start volunteering, and then start asking questions. I wouldn't like walk in the first day and be like, I think you're doing all of these things wrong. This, like, that's probably not going to go over really well. Start volunteering, get into a leadership role, and start making changes. That's how any of this gets better.
Okay, and one more question. So, how would I, if I wanted to like give out speeches, or if I wanted to like, give out speeches to like the community or whatever, how would I be able to do that? Like, would I just like say, hey, I'm gonna give this speech about blah blah blah, sign me up or whatever? I don't know.
I mean, I think the cool trendy thing with you kids right now is becoming a social media influencer, right? You just like get an Instagram channel and like you start like lecturing people on Instagram about things. That would be the first way, because to start giving speeches, you would have to have somebody like invite you to give a speech. I mean, you could just go stand on a quad and start talking. I mean, you could do that. I think the best way is to build like a social media following and a brand, like Pro-Life Food Man or something, and then start building a following, follow other influencers, have them follow you back and all that stuff. And then, yeah. And then depending on how you want to do it, then go to those organizations and be like, hey, I have a personal story I want to share, or I have something unique that I want to share. Can I present at your next regional? Nationally, like there's the U.S. Food Bank, and like there's all these affiliates, and so like they have conferences and things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? No, that's it. How many times did I use my mom voice? My husband just texted me. I don't think I use my mom voice. He said I use my mom voice. I don't think a lot.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Will you please sign my pro-life t-shirt?
Sure. I can do that. So, yeah. Thank you guys for having me and for coming and listening tonight. I really appreciate it. Oh, thank you. That's so